Hi, on behalf of Asian Disaster Preparedness Center, or ADPC, would like to extend a warm welcome to the online self-paced portion of the training course on localizing disaster risk reduction for anticipatory action. Today, we'll be looking at Module 6, Participatory Community Risk Assessment, Tools, and Processes. Let's get started. At the end of the module, you should be able to explain the different participatory community risk assessment tools and have a better understanding in terms of how to apply them in a real life setting. From the earlier modules, you probably have already understand the process of the community-based disaster risk reduction, or CBDRR, and the participatory community risk assessment is a very important step within the CBDRR, because this is where then you can have a really good understanding of the risk environment and the potential challenges that the community have. And based on the information that you have gathered from this process, then you can come up with effective planning and action plan to address those challenges and help the community to strengthen their resilience. So why is it called participatory community risk assessment? Because it is really critical to have the buy-in and the joining of the community members in the process for several good reasons. First, local knowledge. Community members have unique and valuable knowledge about their surroundings, potential hazards, vulnerabilities, and coping mechanisms. They are familiar with the local geography, weather patterns, cultural practices, and past disaster experiences. This information, which may not be available to outside professionals, can provide key insights for risk assessments. 2. Buy-in and ownership. When community members are actively involved in assessing risk, they are more likely to understand, support, and engage in subsequent risk reduction measures. This leads to more sustainable and effective interventions. Empowerment. The participatory process empowers community members by giving them a voice in decisions that directly impact their lives. It builds community capacity and confidence to manage disaster risk and enhance local resilience. Tailor interventions. Through participatory community risk assessment, risk reduction strategy can be customized to fit the specific needs, vulnerabilities, and capacity of the communities. This tailored approach increases the efficacy of interventions. Building trust. The participatory community risk assessment can foster trust between the communities and the facilitating organization, which is critical for the success implementation of risk reduction measures. Equity. Participatory process can help ensure that the perspectives of all community members, including those vulnerable or marginalized, are taken into account. This can lead to more equitable risk reduction interventions. Overall, the Participatory Community Risk Assessment, or PCRA, recognizes community not just as beneficiaries, but as active agents in their own safety and resilience. It aligns with the broader shift towards participatory and people-centered approaches in disaster risk management. Now, in order for a successful assessment, you need to ensure a few things are taken into consideration. Most importantly, you need to have understanding of the local context and community needs. The assessment team should gather preliminary information about the community values, belief systems, and common challenges by consulting various sources such as local authorities, school directors, or church leaders. They need to develop strategy for building trust and managing community expectations while adapting their language for the local context and audience. And you need to balance the assessment process with participants' daily routines, and availability is crucial. The process should be lengthy, demanding significant time from both participants and the assessment team. It is essential to consider when the community members can best participate and ensure representation of diverse community groups. If required, different meetings should be scheduled with varying stakeholders, demonstrating flexibility towards their needs and time constraints. Community buy-in and ownership. Once assessment commences, facilitators should delegate as much authority and decision-making power as feasible to the community members, fostering their sense of ownership over the process. It is crucial that the community identifies and discusses matters of importance to them without undue influence from facilitators. The community perceived risk and priorities may not align with the assessment team's initial expectations, yet the team should understand and respect these viewpoints. No assessment team should begin the process with predetermined expectations about the required outcomes. Maintaining neutrality and supporting the community participants' perspective is the utmost importance. And supporting of community leadership and local governments is encouraging the active participation of local authorities from the planning phase through to the implementation of the assessments is vital. Enhancing communication with civil society is crucial, as political commitments and resolve are often instrumental in executing the outcomes of the assessments. And this has to be an inclusive process. A crucial responsibility of the team lies in advocating for social inclusion in areas facing marginalization. It is imperative to pursue this mission appropriately, employing the most suitable tools. Action during the post-assessment should involve community members, even in cases where the population is transient or possesses diverse livelihood and legal status, such as in urban informal settlements. Understanding the community's formal and informal hierarchies is necessary to ensure that both elected and traditional leaders mutually respect and support each other, and that every community member is provided equal opportunity to participate and contribute to the assessment process. And it is very important to involve other stakeholders like local authorities and humanitarian and development organizations and the National Red Cross and Red Crescent societies in certain assessment activities and discussions. This can heighten their understanding of the challenges of different community sectors face and earn their support in executing activities. Now, as a quick refresher, we talked about earlier about the disaster risk. And in terms of the disaster risk is a function of hazard, vulnerability, exposure, and capacity. So basically what we're trying to do is to try to reduce the vulnerability and the exposure at the same time to enhance the capacities. And in order to understand the risk, this is can be done through the process of disaster risk assessment. So in the disaster risk assessment process, we need to start with hazard identification and hazard analysis. So what is hazard identification? This is really understanding what sort of natural hazards or man-made hazard that community is facing. After you have that information, then you can deep down into the hazard analysis. Basically, it's a process evaluating the information on the hazards to decide which are significant and must be addressed in a risk management plan. Hazard analysis is useful because it helps to create awareness about hazards that threaten communities, organizations, or society. So it is very important to look at the hazard analysis process. So first step that we need to do is to really identify the hazards that is affecting the communities or their areas, and then you need to collect the hazard data about each hazards. Then you have to categorize each hazards, and then you have to have a certain criteria for evaluating which hazard could or should be included in the risk assessment. And there are many different tools that we can use for hazard analysis. So that's something that we now need to look at in details. So the first tool that we usually use for hazard analysis is the historical profile of past hazards. So it determines which hazards have happened in the past and the impact of those hazards. And this can be used to assess the correlation between the development initiatives and disasters. So what we usually do is to table the information that we can find about the past hazards in terms of hazards and the impact, the year that the events happen, and the development activities that we have been used to address those hazards in the past. But please note, we earlier talked about climate change, and the climate change will have an impact on the hazards. So this will basically introduce new risks and vulnerabilities to local communities. So we need to take that into consideration when we actually doing the risk assessment process. Now, the second tool is what we call the seasonal calendar. So it is basically assess the seasonality of hazards and livelihood. This can be used to observe durations, parameters, and it can also be used to see the resources availability. Again, this is a table format where we can list out the different hazards and the month that the hazard occurred, and also the impact of the hazards on the livelihood. So from this table, you can see there's more focus on the agricultural, so the impact of the different hazards on the different crops. And in order to get this kind of information, we can ask these potential questions. When do hazards occur? How long do the hazards stay? And this can be combined with calendar activities related to cropping or livelihood. And we can ask about, do hazards combine with peak working or harvest season? Or do hazards threaten livelihoods or harvest? Again, please know that climate change will have an impact on the seasonality of the hazards and the impact on the agricultural practices and livelihood. The next tool that we usually use for hazard analysis is hazard map. It basically locates the probable path or area covered by a hazard's impact. It is also a tool for exposure analysis when the data is added to show the element at risk. So here's a very good example of a hand-drawn hazard map. But why we use hand-drawn rather than a computer-generated maps? So hand-drawn maps can provide a number of benefits over the computer-generated maps, especially in the context community-level risk assessments. Here are some reasons why. First, participation and engagement. Hand-drawing a risk map allows for more active involvement from community members. It can be a collaborative, participatory exercise that encourages discussions and shared decision-making, helping to build community consensus and ownership over the resulting map and subsequent risk reduction measure. And it also helps to incorporate local knowledges into the map. Community members have deep and nuanced understanding of their local environment, which they can directly express and share through a hand-drawn map. This local knowledge can often provide insights that may not be captured in available data or visible on a computer-generated map. In terms of accessibility, hand-drawn maps can be created and interpreted by community members who may have limited literacy or familiarity with more technical computer-generated maps. Hand-drawn maps can also be produced without the need for electricity, internet access, or expensive technology, which can be a major advantage in many settings. A hand-drawn map can also be easily updated and adapted over time, allowing it to reflect changes in the communities or its environment. And specific information can include not only the physical feature, but also social, cultural, and historical aspects of the community that is relevant to risk assessments. However, it is important to know that hand-drawn maps and computer-generated maps can often complement each other well. For instance, a computer-generated map can provide useful baseline or framework, while a hand-drawn map can add depth, detail, and context-specific knowledges. And the next tool that we usually use for hazard analysis is what we call a hazard matrix. It's pretty much putting together all the hazard parameters into a single table. Now, when we talk about the parameters, there are actually 8 different parameters we have to look at. These are the origin, the factors that create or result in the hazard, the force that it can damage, the warning sign and signal. This can be scientific or indigenous or local knowledge or signs that a hazard event is likely to happen. For warming, I mean the lead time or the time gap between warning signs and the impact of the hazards. Continue on the parameters, we talk about the speed of onset. So how rapidly the arrival of the hazard and its impact, frequency, how often it is to occur, when or seasonality, basically the occurrence of a hazard at a particular time of the year, and duration, how long or could the hazard impact last or be felt. Now, when you put everything into a table, and this is what a hazard risk assessment matrix looks like. Here we have the information for flood, drought, and landslide, the origin of the hazards, the warning, the forewarning, the force or intensity, the speed, the frequency of onset, the seasonality, and the duration. So this will be a very useful map or matrix that we can really have a one glance understanding in terms of the hazard situation in the local communities. And after we have that, we need to basically rank the hazards with either a number values or sometimes in the computer level using a relative value such as beans and other simple to understand scales that the community may have already been using. As we cannot address every single hazard, we really need to look at the available resources and then to try to prioritize which hazards are more frequent and more important and that requires the most of our resources trying to address them. After we have actually a good understanding of the hazard through the hazard analysis and looking at the exposure, how sort of cropping and livelihood are exposed to the hazards, we then now move on to the vulnerability assessments. So what is a vulnerability assessment? It's basically a participatory process to identify what elements are at risk per hazard type and to analyze the cause why these elements can be damaged. So a quick recap again. What is vulnerability? The vulnerability is the condition determined by physical, social, economic, and environmental factors or processes which increase the accessibility of an individual, community, or assets or systems to the impact of hazards. So for positive factor which increase the ability of people to cope with hazards, that is also what we refer to as capacity and coping capacity. So vulnerability is basically the opposite of capacity or coping capacity. And earlier we talked about the 4 different types of vulnerability capacity: social, economic, environment, and physical. Now for the refresher, you can always go back to module 2 on the key concept and terminology to have more information about these 4 vulnerabilities and capacity. So how do we do the vulnerability assessments? There are many different ways and tools that we can use. The simplest one is what we call a semi-structured interviews. And these are the questions that we can ask during the interviews. Who are at risk or can incur damage or loss? What are the other elements at risk? What damage or loss can these people or elements at risk suffer or incur? This including physical damage, death, injuries, and so on and so forth. And why these people and elements suffer damages and losses. Of course, there are other questions that you can use to understand a bit more in terms of the vulnerability. Now, the next tool that we can use is what we call a livelihood analysis. A livelihood analysis is basically focusing on the understanding of how people make a living, what resources and strategies they use, and what factors affect their ability to secure a livelihood, and how these can contribute to vulnerability assessments. It's basically understanding the impact of hazards. Different livelihood may be affected by hazard, but in different ways. For example, farming communities may be heavily impacted by drought or flooding, while fishing communities may be more vulnerable to storms or change in the ocean conditions. Identifying the vulnerable groups. Some livelihoods may be more vulnerable to hazards or shocks than others due to factors like income, lack of diversity, dependency on natural resources, and limited access to markets and services. Accessing coping and adaptation strategies. People often have strategies to cope with or adapt to risks and shocks that affect their livelihood. This can include diversifying income sources, using savings or social network for support, changing farming or fishing practices, or migrating in search of work. And of course, identifying opportunity for reducing vulnerabilities. Livelihood analysis can highlight opportunity to reduce the vulnerabilities and enhance resilience. This could involve supporting livelihood diversification, improving access to markets or services, promoting sustainable use of natural resources, and strengthening the social safety net. So a variety of tools and approaches can be used for livelihood analysis, such as the Sustainable Livelihood Framework developed by the UK government. This framework considers a range of factors, including assets that can be human, natural, financial, physical, and social capital, vulnerability context, trends, shock, and seasonality, and livelihood strategy, and institutional structures and processes. You can find more information about the Sustainable Livelihood Framework in the reading material of these modules. Now, the next tool that we use for vulnerability assessments is called community drama. So community drama or theater can be an effective tool for assessing community risk in looking at raising awareness. Community drama can present the potential disaster scenarios in a vivid and memorable way, making abstract risk more concrete. And this can help to raise awareness about these risks among community members. Promote discussions. Drama can stimulate discussion about disaster risk, vulnerabilities, and coping strategies. These discussions can provide valuable insights for risk assessment. Reveals local knowledge and perceptions. The process of creating community drama can reveal local knowledge about hazards and vulnerability, as well as community perceptions about risk and capacity. This information can inform risk assessment. Engage diverse participants. Drama can engage a broad range of community members, including those who might be less likely to participate in more formal or conventional risk assessment activities. This can help ensure that risk assessment takes into account diverse perspectives and experiences. And it can also help identify potential solutions. Through the process of creating and performing the drama, community members may identify and explore potential solutions to reduce risk. Remember, though, that while community drama can be a powerful tool, it should ideally be used in combination with other methods as part of a comprehensive participatory risk assessment process. The next tool that we can use is what we call a transect walk. A transect walk is a systematic walk along a defined path across a community or ecosystems, during which information is collected on spatial patterns, physical structures, or processes. It's a commonly used tool, techniques, and in a community-based vulnerability assessments. So how can it be utilized? So first, community participation. A transect walk is typically done with involvement of community members. This participation helps incorporate local knowledges and perspectives into the assessments. Physical inspections. The walk allows for direct observation of the community physical structures, geographical features, and environmental conditions, which can inform the understanding of potential hazards and vulnerabilities. Identifying vulnerable areas and groups. A transect walk can help identify areas and populations within communities that may be particularly vulnerable to different hazards, such as low-lying areas prone to flooding or neighborhoods with poorly constructed housing. And this should be used as part of the process to develop a risk map. And the transect walk can also help build understanding and consensus. Participating in a transect walk can help community members to better understand their vulnerabilities and importance of risk reduction measures. During a transect walk, it can be helpful to take notes, draw sketches, take photos, or even audios or video recording to capture information. But please do get a prior consensus approval of the community members before you start recording videos or audios. It is also very important to engage in conversation with community members along the way, asking questions or listening to their views and knowledges. After the walk, it is useful to have a group discussion to review and analyze the findings. This should be used in conjunction with the community hazard vulnerability mapping tool. Now, the next tool that we can use for vulnerability assessment is the seasonal calendar. Here, as you can see, very similar to the hazard analysis work that we have mentioned earlier. The seasonal calendar is also to highlight more focusing on the livelihood and looking at the various different impact to the crops depending on the various different type of hazards. The next tool that we can use for vulnerability assessment is the problem tree. A problem tree analysis is a graphical illustration of causal relationship between problems. It is a participatory tool that can be used in a vulnerability assessment to identify, explore, and visualize the causes and effects of identified problems, often in relationship to disaster risk or vulnerability. So how the problem tree can help? It can really help in a graphical way to identify the core problem. So the first step in developing a problem tree is identify the core problem or issue. This is often a manifestation of vulnerabilities or risk. Identify the causes. So the next step is to identify the causes or contributing factors to the core problem, which form the roots of the tree. For our example, this might include things like deforestation in the watershed, lack of early warning systems, poor infrastructure, and limited community knowledge on the flood risk. Identifying effects. Then identifying effects or consequences of the core problem, which form the branches of the tree. So for the flooding and vulnerability effects, this could be loss of lives, damage to property, disruption in livelihood, and increased health risk. The problem tree visually maps out the complex interrelated factors contributing to vulnerability. It helps to highlight the root causes, which may be less visible but need to be addressed for the sustainable solutions. It can also help prioritize areas for actions based on the identified causes and effects. The problem tree should ideally be developed with the participation from community members and other stakeholders to incorporate their knowledge and perspective. After constructing the problem tree, it can be transformed into a solution tree or objective tree by reversing the negative statements into positive ones, thus providing a framework for formulating strategies and actions to reduce vulnerability. The next is the hazard and vulnerability map that we can use for vulnerability assessments. Again, this is a hand-drawn one, and this is really based on the hazard map from the hazard analysis. But what we're adding here is the vulnerabilities. So we're actually identifying vulnerabilities that can or could make certain areas or communities more susceptible to the hazards. Vulnerability can include factors like population densities, property levels, building standards, environmental conditions, and preparedness measure. This data is collected and analyzed using GIS or other tools, or simply by interviewing the local communities. Of course, the map also help us to map out the vulnerabilities. So this is really identify where these vulnerabilities are located and is overlaid with the hazard maps to create a comprehensive hazard and vulnerability map. This map can help visualize the areas and communities that are most at risk from the different hazards, taking into account both the hazard characteristics and the vulnerability factors. It is important to know that the process of creating a hazard vulnerability map should ideally be participatory, involving community members and other stakeholders. This can help ensure the map accurately reflects local conditions and knowledge, and that is used effectively to reduce the risk and enhance resilience. Now, the last tool that we usually use for vulnerability assessment is called a vulnerability assessment matrix. And here from this table, you can see it is a tool that can be used to identify, assess, and prioritize vulnerabilities in a structured and systematic way. The matrix typically involves listing the potential hazards and the vulnerabilities. But to take one step forward, we also include capacity into this matrix. So remember from the earlier model, capacity refers to the resources, means, and strength which enable communities to cope with, withstand, prepare for, prevent, mitigate, or quickly recover from a disasters. So how do we get the capacity? So usually we look at the existing capacity of the communities and new or other capacity that is needed. And most often that to get information, we need to conduct what we call a capacity assessment. So capacity assessment is an integral part of a risk assessment process. When we talk about risk assessment, it's more focusing on identifying and analyzing potential hazards and vulnerability. Capacity assessment look at the abilities, resources, and strength that community can use to reduce risk and respond effectively to disasters. So how do we conduct capacity assessments? First, we need to identify resources and abilities. This is the first step to really look at what resources and abilities are available within the communities that can help mitigate the risk or response to hazards. These might include physical resources like emergency equipment for shelters, financial resources, human resources like skills, knowledge, and labor, Social resources like network, relationships, communication organization, and institutional resources like local government agencies, laws, and policies. Then next we need to do assessment of the capacity. So once the resources and abilities have been identified, the next step is to assess their capacity. This might involve considering questions like how effective are these resources in mitigating risk or responding to hazards? Are they easily accessible and available when needed? Are they sustainable and resilient in the face of disasters? After that, we need to identify the capacity gaps. The capacity assessment should also identify any gaps or weaknesses that might limit the community's ability to manage risk. This could be a lack of necessary resources, skills, or knowledge, or it could be structural issues like poor infrastructures or governance. So after all that, then we can think about how do we develop capacity building strategy to address those gaps, and then how do we actually monitor and evaluate the process of the implementation of the capacity strategies. By focusing on both risk and capacity, a community risk assessment can provide a more holistic understanding of the community disaster landscape and inform more effective and sustained disaster risk reduction strategy. So continuing the disaster risk assessment process, we have now complete the hazard identification, the hazard analysis, exposure analysis, vulnerability assessments, and capacity assessment steps. Now it is time to move into the risk analysis and the risk evaluation components of the assessment process. So risk analysis is a component of the overall risk assessment process, which helps identify and understand the potential dangers or risks that can negatively impact an individual, community, or organizations. And usually we're actually doing this in a tabular format where, as you can see from the slides, you have the likelihood on the left, then you have the consequences on the right. On the likelihood, you have different scales from rare to a certain, possible, likely to almost certain, and the consequences you have insignificant, minor, moderate, major to extreme. So once hazards are identified, risk analysis helps to determine the potential impacts of those hazards. This involves understanding the vulnerability of the population or assets at risk, as well as their capacity to manage and respond to those hazards. Risk analysis often involves considering the probability of the hazard occurring and the potential severity of its consequences. And it's good to be noted that we always need to include the potential losses to be incurred. For example, the loss of specific crops or the death of the livestock and such. And following the risk analysis, we need to do the risk evaluation. So based on the likelihood and based on the consequences, we really need to decide what we need to focus on. So following the risk analysis, the information is used to make decisions about the acceptability of the risk and the need for mitigating strategies. This often involves comparing the risk level against predefined risk criteria and prioritizing the risk based on their severity and livelihood. So from this table, you can see the green part where it is rare, uncertain, and in terms of the consequences, insignificant, minor. These are the acceptable risk that moves on to the monitor, mitigate, and of course, where we would like to eliminate the extreme consequences with almost certain likelihood of a disaster or hazard happening. So when we're talking about risk evaluation, it is a crucial part of the community risk assessment process. Involves looking at the significance of the identified risk and comparing the estimate risk against given risk criteria to make a decision about the priorities and necessity of the risk treatments. So how do we do that in a community context? We need to start on the risk ranking. So once the risks have been identified and analyzed, they need to be ranked or prioritized. It is based on the severity or potential of the impact and the likelihood of the risk occurring. High probability, high impact risk should be typically given higher priorities. And then you have to compare that against the risk criteria. The identified risks are compared against established risk criteria, which may be based on legal requirements, the community values, or other relevant factors. This will help to determine which risks are tolerable and which are not. Then, of course, you have to determine the risk acceptability. Not all risks can be eliminated completely, so the community needs to decide what level of risk is acceptable. This might involve balancing the potential harms of the risk against the costs and benefits of different risk treatment options. And we need to make a decision. Based on the risk evaluation, decision can be made about what action should be taken. For example, risks that are deemed unacceptable might need to be addressed through mitigation strategy or emergency planning. And the last step is the documentation and communication. The results of the risk evaluation should be documented and communicated to all relevant stakeholders. This helps ensure that everyone understands the risk and what steps are being taken to manage them. Remember, risk evaluation is not a one-time process, but should be regularly updated as new information becomes available or circumstances change. And the circumstances, as we're facing these days, is climate change. So how climate change will have an impact on the overall process of the participatory community risk assessment. So climate change will definitely have an impact on the participatory community risk assessment process. When we're looking at the escalation in food insecurity due to crop failures from rising temperature, more frequent hot days, and increased natural hazards like droughts, heat, or cold waves, wildfires, emergence of new pests and diseases. And this will have an impact on the livestock as well, when we're actually talking about new emerging diseases spreading due to the warmer temperature, or crop diseases that is actually having a great impact on harvest and nutrition. The health risks are projected to be worsened due to the climate change, and heat waves in recent years have also affected both rich and the poor countries. The risk of flooding may also potentially lead to water source contamination and increasing exposure to waterborne diseases, while some locations may experience increased drought, leading to the consumption of unsafe water. Higher temperature could also alter the geographical range of vector-borne diseases like malaria and dengue. So, the participatory community risk assessment process greatly bolsters climate change adaptation efforts by enlightening individuals about the risk and empowering them to make knowledgeable decisions to lessen their vulnerabilities to both existing and new risk. Adaptation involves taking necessary action to confront the current and future impact of climate change. Such action can occur at various levels and scales, can include preparing for intensified or emerging hazards, modifying agriculture practices, such as altering crop varieties to cope with rising average temperature, or changing planting schedules due to shifting rainfall patterns, adapting and diversifying livelihood activities to reduce reliance on weather-dependent ones, collaborating at the community level to preserve water resources in response to drought, taking measures at the city or local administration level to address changes in water supply, new health risks, flooding and potential extreme temperatures, and their effects on vulnerable populations and the elderly, homeless, and the very young. These activities underline some of the steps necessary to enhance community resilience in the face of climate change impacts. Awareness of the uncertainty brought by climate change can aid communities in understanding its impact and inform their future priorities and action. And this takes us to the end of Module 6. I hope you have enjoyed the sessions. And again, this is a self-paced modules. Please feel free to go back to any points within the PowerPoint presentation to listen for more information. With that, a warm goodbye.